My name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guests Paul Piwko, Alexandra Orlandi, Ann Walton, Mark Cutler, and Natasha Wein, all of whom are associated with the National Museum of Mental Health Project, a virtual online museum without walls that researches and creates exhibitions whose goals are to transform society's attitudes about and understanding of mental health. Paul and Alexandra are the co-developers of the project. Anne is a board member. Mark serves as the Songwriter-in-Residence, and Natasha is one of the contributors to the project. During the program, we're finding out why and how the National Museum of Mental Health Project came about and how it's grown, developed, and operates today. We'll go on a behind-the-scenes tour of what you can find online, and in the process come to better understand and appreciate the project's commitment to better understanding and supporting mental health literacy. Let's start by meeting our guest and then learning all about the National Museum of Mental Health Project. Welcome. So delighted you're all able to be here. It's been very interesting to read about your innovative initiative. I'm eager to find out more and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, Paul and Alexandra, would you please start by briefly sharing a little bit about your backgrounds and current positions, please? Paul, would you start?
Sure. So I'm, co-developer and co-founder of the National Museum of Mental Health Project. My background professionally is really in two different areas. My early career was in the corporate world in accounting, finance, marketing, and new product development. And more recently, my background's been in higher education. Most recently, I taught for 9 years, teaching and researching at Assumption University, which is where Alex and I met. And, at this really exciting moment where I'm taking a kind of career break from higher education to focus on the National Museum of Mental Health Project because we're at such an interesting stage.
Terrific, terrific. Well, we'll be hearing much more about that shortly. Alexandra, welcome. A little bit, please, about your background and current position.
Sure. So same as Paul, with being co-developer, co-founder of the National Museum of Mental Health Project. I have more of a psychology background. So like Paul and I kind of like to say where I have the psych background, Paul has the business background. So we kind of tag team it there. I worked in a psychiatric hospital for more than 3 years, but currently I am working with children with autism. And we'll see what happens next. Not sure where I'm going after this, but definitely staying in the psych field. So
Terrific, terrific. Paul, would you continue and give us a little sense of the history and mission of the project, why and how it came about?
Yeah, I think before I talk about the project, Jay, I would like to talk about this moment in time that we're in with respect to mental health. And, we're at such a fascinating moment, and there's such great opportunity in this moment. And there's a kind of dialectic here, right? Two things that are, seemingly can't go together are both true. One is, we're in the midst of what, generally is agreed to be a mental health crisis. It's been recognized more recently since COVID. So we've got this mental health crisis on one hand, but on the other hand, arguably, at least in Western civilization, there's probably never been a better time than now with regard to finding treatment, finding help, and talking about mental illness and mental health in general. And so we're at this really amazing moment, and we find ourselves as a project inspired by many different organizations and their work. We're very inspired by the very good work that's been done by organizations that have made it their mission to, address mental health stigma. We have immense respect for these organizations, for their efforts. Thankfully, there's a lot of headway being made. And all along, we've always felt that, yes, we stand with these organizations and the good work that they're doing. But always we've tried to be mindful of, well, what do we think needs to come next? As stigma comes down, which, by no means has it come down in every household for every individual in all parts of the country, but maybe we're making progress, right? But as stigma comes down, what is it that stigma has prevented? What have been the societal effects of stigma? And we believe, it's prevented the development of mental health literacy. This basic competency around how we manage ourselves, manage our emotions, understand things both from a cognitive, an emotional, and almost a spiritual sense, right? Understanding, ourselves. And so our mission has a lot to do with mental health literacy. And before I give you a little more on the history, I think it would be great if maybe you heard a little bit more about our mission, because it connects both our history with all of our aspirations. And so, Alex, would you, want to talk a bit about our mission? Alex, by the way, wrote our mission statement. Um,
Great. Please, Alex, continue.
Sure. Yeah. So our mission is strengthening mental health literacy nationwide through the arts by bringing the exhibit. Sorry, we usually said bringing the exhibition to you, but we've recently changed it to bringing the museum to you, which we will explain more about later. But like Paul said, we're not necessarily trying to focus on the anti-stigma aspect of it, which that is still important, but we really try to emphasize mental health literacy, like learning more about how to utilize skills to address mental illness, both like for yourself and for others. And so the reason why we chose nationwide, actually, Paul, do you want to talk more about
sure.
that?
Maybe it would be good to get into the history a bit.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna say,
Alex
I
and
feel
I
like
first,
going out of
yeah,
order.
yeah, that may, my fault. Alex and I first met at Assumption University. Alex was a student, I was teaching. We were a curious pairing from the start. I was a business professor, Alex was a psychology student. And our work together has kind of happened in maybe three stages or three phases. The first phase of the work was, creative and research based. So before we did anything else, and Anne would have been involved in some of these early exchanges as well, we did a lot of imagining. We started from this fundamental belief that there should be a National Museum of Mental Health. But we also started mindful that, compared to such a really wide-reaching and large goal, we are starting small. And so we call ourselves the National Museum of Mental Health Project. But in that first phase, we did a lot of imagining. What might a museum might look like? How might we go about setting one up? And we did a lot of research. And so Alex and I were fortunate to participate in or to have been awarded a research fellowship at Assumption University, where we were able to travel and essentially take a summer to interview those who have created mental health exhibitions, which our research helped us see became an emerging trend somewhere in the 2016 to 2019, 20-ish timeframe. And so maybe like a child who looks up to athletes, well, we were researchers, we were nerds, and we had an opportunity to speak with and interview people who were creating, at least in one case, the largest mental health exhibition in the United States, Mental Health Mind Matters, which was created by Science Museum of Minnesota. And so in the first stage, we did a lot of research. We came to understand and meet and learn from those who have stood up exhibitions about mental health, both in public locations and in museums. And we also began to kind of imagine how might, our effort work. And by the time we got to the second stage, you'll see on screen it says fostering collaboration. From the very beginning, I say we, and I don't mean Alex and I, or Alex and myself and Anne. I mean, anyone who is willing to be a part of this ongoing conversation. And so by the time we moved to our second phase, it was really about trying to, get some programs like a museum would have, get an exhibition like a museum would have, and begin to sort of test out this idea of a virtual or a distributed museum. And so during this second phase, we were fortunate, and maybe Mark will talk about how we connected. We were fortunate to encounter Mark and the amazing work that he does with regard to community songwriting. And very quickly, we couldn't identify exactly how we wanted to collaborate, but we knew that from a spiritual standpoint, we had the same kinds of goals, and we were doing the same kind of work. And so, arguably, if a museum has programming as an important part of what goes on within its four walls, well, we think a distributed museum, a virtual museum, should also have programming, but programming that occurs, out where the visitors are, as opposed to having them come to us. And so we were fortunate in this second phase to develop the community songwriting on campus, the initiative with Mark and the Same Thing project. And also during the second phase, we began serious work on I Get It, which is where we encountered collaborators like Natasha. And so Alex and I don't know if you want to jump in a little bit more on the history, but that's kind of where we've been. And we find ourselves at this really interesting moment that by the time we're done talking today, we can say more about.
Great. Well, for the sake of time, I just want to pick up here and just a quick reference of the significance of the Medfield State Hospital Cemetery, and then we'll keep things going.
Yeah, some of the earliest inspiration, creatively and otherwise, with respect to the ideas that we're now working with, actually occurred during visits to the Medfield State Hospital Cemetery. Um, Very moving experience. And so I would have visited there. Alex would have visited there, and we've been inspired by looking backward and contemplating how mental health and mental illness has been treated historically, but also as a jumping off point to the future. And this is the source of our great optimism that we are at this great moment of change.
And Alex, Paul mentioned that you've been doing a lot of collaborating throughout, and one way has been making presentations. Just a quick word about what we're seeing here.
Sorry, I was muted. I think it was 2018 where back to back, Paul and I both presented what we had in terms of research about mental health exhibitions and like our ideas at two different conferences, which were NEPA and NEMA. So one was like a psychology conference and one was a museum conference, just to cover our bases. And at the time, what we had back then was actually like, although some concepts have really pulled through, a lot of the concepts were more research. So actually what the picture you're looking at right now is just all the research that we did during the honors fellowship where Paul and I met and started our research together. But it was a good start to start talking to people in the psychology realm and start talking to people in the museum realm. And I think it really showed us how serious our project was and how serious people could take it. And I think that gave us some inspiration and push to keep going, because November wasn't really that much further on than the end of the summer. Because we didn't know where this was going to go. We just kind of had this concept of a National Museum of Mental Health that we were talking about. And I think that this was a moment where it started to like solidify a little more. But again, a while ago now, and it's awesome to see it, but we've definitely gone a long way from there.
Alex, Paul mentioned, I get it. Would you just share a few more words before we see some wonderful contributions to this project?
Sure. So, as we've talked about, it's a virtual exhibition that the National Museum Mental Health Project is creating. It's currently more in a sneak preview phase where we plan to launch it completely in January 2024. Um, and so basically we see anyone as an artist. So you don't have to be a professional artist, painter. You don't have to be a professional dancer. You don't have to be a professional writer. It's just anyone who has a story to share about their mental health journey. And the way we like to see it as is a mental health mosaic. So like leave a piece, take a piece. So meaning that we all have something that we can benefit from others sharing their stories. And this can be through poetry, it can be through theater, it can be through dance. It doesn't matter. It's just as long as it's a creative form of expression, we can learn from it. And the words "I get it" is means that there are people, a lot of people experience mental illness and struggle with their mental health. And it's just really nice to see when other people understand what that's like. And that itself is helpful as well. And the more, I guess, resources people who submit these art pieces put into this space, the more others can use it. And so we hope for the exhibition to not only be a place where people can share their creativity in terms of their mental health, but also just a place where people can gather resources to feel better, because people get it, and everyone should help each other out. So
Shortly, Natasha's going to share some of her wonderful
yep.
contributions. But before we get there, Paul, can you just very briefly give us a sense of these initial contributions as well? This one, I believe, by composer Peter Van Tine.
Absolutely, Jay. And in many ways, the work of I Get It is inspired by the AIDS quilt. Both of them come up against heavy, heavy stigma. Both of them are, in their own way, public, right? Like we are accepting submissions from the public, and so in many ways, we are inspired by the work of the AIDS quilt. This idea of a public art exhibition that helped people really understand at an important moment a health issue, right, in society, but everything that was wrapped around that health issue as well. And so what we're looking at here, a mindfulness experience. Of course, this idea of mindfulness is something that has become mainstream. Um, you know, John Kabat-Zinn, we come from the Worcester area, and we take inspiration from others who come from the Worcester area, like John Kabat-Zinn, who helped popularize this idea of mindfulness. And so when we think about this mental health mosaic, we believe each of us has one, and that if we can only share pieces of our own mental health mosaic with others, they may be able to learn and grow as a result. So Peter Van Tine is a composer educated at Berkeley, and he created By Water's Calm initially as a piano score. Ultimately, he created a video that has scenes of all different types of water, gently flowing, still, rapidly moving, and so this is visible as part of the sneak preview for I Get It, which is alive and visible on Instagram and on Facebook.
And how about hearing again briefly Karita Brown's contribution?
Sure, Alex. Would you like me to? So yes, this is Sharita Cole Brown of Baltimore, Maryland. Sharita has contributed essentially a story. As you can see, Sharita, her form of art was storytelling. she looked into her phone and recorded a video and talked about what it was like growing up with bipolar illness. And again, a very moving story of someone who very early in her life was sent signals, I think, to try to manage her expectations about, what she would be able to develop into. And, all these years later, Sharita is a very outspoken person on the topic of mental health. She's become an author. She raised children by herself after kind of having been told this might not be such a good idea. And so Sharita was one of the earlier submissions we received for I Get It.
And Alex, could you wrap this up with one other example briefly, Catherine McNamara's contribution?
Sure. So this we call, as same with Sharita, a piece of oral history where someone shares their journey orally. So instead of it being like a piece of writing or dancing or whatever, but she was talking about her journey with her mental illness and how that was connected with family struggles and how she found hope through college, and college kind of being the thing that brought her through, which in relation to what I was saying, I Get It is about, she was giving a resource, like saying that this is how I got through. And I think people can be inspired by other people's healing stories. And in terms of the I Get It, many people struggle with difficult family backgrounds, and someone with a difficult family background might look at this and be like, okay, she gets it, or I get her, like she struggles with that too, and it contributes to your mental health. So it's again, it's just a good piece to add to I Get It in our sneak preview right now, but we shall add more soon.
Terrific. And one way viewers and others can stay informed is the website and other contact information that we'll be providing at the end of the program, along with this QR code here. Moving on, Anne, I want to welcome you. Delighted you're able to be a part of our conversation. Would you please share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jay. I am a registered nurse. I have been for about 45 years. So you can imagine I have a pretty wide, extensive CV, not that it's impressive, but in terms of experiences in the healthcare field in various settings. And I have been in academic research for about the last 15 or 20 years. And the research that I've been involved in looks at something we call the social determinants of health, which you and your viewers may or may not be aware of. But the social determinants are areas or conditions that are in a person's life that really impact their health and well-being. So it involves thinking beyond like what's your cholesterol and what's your blood pressure. It's social determinants are things like, do you have access to safe and affordable housing? Do you have access to education, literacy, language skills, social supports, those kinds of things? Healthcare. I mean, that's pretty basic. And I might add non-judgmental healthcare. So we've been talking about stigma and what's involved in having diseases that are often stigmatized, obesity and, addiction and mental illness. And so by addressing these things, which are not traditionally thought of as having to do with health, you go to a doctor, you're seen for 10 or 15 minutes. They don't want to really talk to you about, whether you have strong literacy skills or whether, you're struggling emotionally. That's changing a little bit. But the reason that social determinants of health came into healthcare was because there was recognition that healthcare is more than just, taking a pill for your blood pressure or, getting your vaccines or whatever. And so by addressing the social determinants of health, we look at conditions within a person's life that have been shown through research to impact health outcomes and quality of life. And so Paul brought me in during that imagining period. And I think our first conversation was at a picnic table near a park in our town, to talk about what he was imagining. And as somebody who has always thought in terms of my working in healthcare, at least for half of my career, I tend to think out of the box and, well, if that doesn't work, why are we still doing it? Let's try this instead. And so I was really intrigued by those early conversations that we had. And so in our multiple conversations, that idea of social determinants came up. And I really began to feel like, coming from a medical background, there were a lot of things that I could offer that were transferable to the work that he and Alex had begun doing. And, I'm very passionate about health equity and parity between, physical health, mental health, and spiritual health. You have to treat the whole body in the medical field, is my opinion. And I think, when things are stigmatized or things are, silenced in ways that people are made to feel shamed or embarrassed, and pushed away from that access. The access is so important. And, nobody wants to go to get their health care where they're going to be, shamed, or it's going to be implied that it's their character, or if they tried harder. And unfortunately, those things still happen. And, rather than having, behavioral health assessments as part of the general construct of a primary care visit. And so this work just lends itself to the things that I'm passionate about. And that's really why I became involved. And I think it's really interesting when we talk about stigma. When I have viewed that cemetery monument numerous times, and for some reason it struck me that, it didn't say, they have lived, loved, and laughed. It said, remember us, for we too. We're no different. We too implies that we are part of, not apart from. And I think for the people in my life who struggle with mental health issues, they don't feel a part of, they feel apart from.
Mhm.
And that's a terrible, it's, as a provider, as a healthcare provider, spending my whole life as a nurse, that makes me feel terrible that they feel that way because of their issues not being properly addressed. And I can only imagine how difficult that is for the person who's experiencing that. And so, I don't know if you want me to stop, but in terms of the whole model of the virtual museum, I think that, virtual exhibitions offer a place where that stigma isn't alive and well. It's a place where people can go in privacy. They can maybe begin to build trust around accessing care, around getting the help that they need. They can access through the exhibits and things like, Natasha's going to speak about, lived experience. I can't offer someone with mental illness my experience because that's not my truth. So by being able to access a virtual exhibit that includes the arts, all different forms of art that make it easier for the person who perhaps is hesitating, but through that medium of art feels comfortable sharing, then, they're in a safe place. They can share, they can learn about resources that they otherwise might not know about, and they can have that connection with the shared experiences of others, with the idea, I see that as offering tremendous hope and opportunity for people to sort of follow their gut instinct that is a true instinct that tells them, I'm worthy. I should be able to get help. I should be able to get care. People should acknowledge me with all my whiskers and all my concerns, and, and help me, not set me apart. Can you imagine being diagnosed with cancer and having people judge you for that? Or I mean, really, the only physical ailment that I can think of where you may be judged is, lung cancer for cigarette smoking and obesity for overeating. And, if you have a genetic predisposition to each of those, you're more likely to get it. You don't wake up and say, I think my goal in life is to be obese,
And I was going to ask you to share what you see as the promise of the project, but I think you just outlined so eloquently your response to that, and just a wonderful guideline for the rest of us to appreciate and build on. And we're going to move on for now.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome Mark and thank you for taking the time to be here. And would you please start by sharing a little bit about your background, and then we can hear how you became involved, please.
Thank you. I was a professional musician for most of my adult life. I toured throughout the country during the 80s and recorded a few albums, and was a touring musician. And then my son was born, and I got a day job while continuing to be a musician. Toward the end of when my son graduated college, I got back into music full time. And one of the things that happened to me was a friend of mine who was also a film director. His name's Jim Walpaw. He was directing a film, actually we're finishing the film now. This is back in 2015. It was a film about the Lad School. And the Lad School was an institution for folks who had developmental disabilities, although they were kind of referred to in a more derogatory way back then. And it had a sordid past. So he was working on a film called Best Judgment. And it was just the way folks were dealt with back then. And he asked me if I would do a soundtrack for him for the movie. And I said, absolutely. And then he asked me, would I be interested in collaborating with folks who were former residents of Lad School, folks who have Down syndrome, folks who are autistic, folks who have other developmental disabilities. And I jumped at the chance because I thought it was like, this is like, what a great opportunity this is to be, introduced to a world that I wasn't familiar with. And after we were having our first cast meeting, and I was, before the meeting, I was saying, did I do the right thing by quitting my job and doing this? This doesn't. I'm kind of afraid of what's going to happen. But then when I was surrounded with my collaborators and the people who are making the film, I looked up in the sky, and I'm not even a big religious person, but I said, thank you, God. It was like a sign, just meeting these folks and getting together with them. And we've been working on and off. We're finishing up the film this year, and it should be out, the beginning of next year. But the experience opened me up to a whole new world of people who are different than I am. And I thought to myself, I said, this world has so many nuances and people in it that are worth knowing. And I would love for other people to experience what I'm experiencing, this sort of culture shock of meeting people that you never thought you would meet, and had no intention of meeting. But when you meet them, they open up a new world to you, and they offer and they teach you stuff as well as you teaching them stuff. And I said, this would be a great thing this could be the good germ for a program. And then I thought to myself, I said, there are people all over the world who aren't, you don't have to be developmentally disabled. You just have to be different from somebody. You could be a person who's conservative. You could be a person who's working class. You could be a person who's white collar. Usually folks like this don't mingle. And so I decided I came up with the concept of the Same Thing Project, where you get people from all different backgrounds, people who have developmental disabilities, people who are professionals, people who are blue collar, get them in the same room together, have a discussion and write a song about something maybe we can all agree on, or maybe not agree on, but just something where we can share our thoughts about a subject. And I've been doing it since 2016 now, and every week we've written a song and we've created connections. And like as I say in my little elevator pitch, we reduce isolation. And I think that's like one of the things that the Same Thing addresses is I got it from the Dalai Lama, from his book, well, from the book Conversations with the Dalai Lama. He says, we all want the same thing. We all want to feel connected. We all breathe the same air, and you love what you have. And so that's what the same thing is about, just finding what connects us and appreciating that. And so that's what I've been doing. It's been the best thing I've ever done in my life, as far as I'm concerned. It's just a thing, I feel connected. For people who show up to the workshops, they say it's the best 2 hours of their life that week. So, it's a really rewarding experience. And I feel rewarded every week because everybody's participating. I'm just there to wrangle. I'm not the leader. I'm just the person who kind of like wrangles the cats.
Very inspiring to hear. And how has that evolved with your involvement with the National Museum of Mental Health project?
Well, the National Museum of Mental Health project, through Paul contacted me and he told me about his project. And I said, that's an amazing project and I would be proud to be part of this. And then Paul opened me up to the Community Songwriting for Mental Health project, where we bring the same thing, the goals of the same thing project to college campuses, where there are people on campus, especially after COVID, they're feeling so isolated and disconnected that they had they were going through their own PTSD. And we get them together in a room and we just talk about stuff, whether it's the pressure of school, the pressure of getting a grade, what's going to happen when we leave these walls, what's going to happen to us. And it's not, like I say, it's not therapy, but it's therapeutic. And I feel that everybody who leaves the workshops is uplifted. And that's thanks to Paul and Anne and Alex. They have really helped organize this college tour and connecting me up with different campuses and stuff. And I'm very appreciative of that.
In closing, before we move on and hear from Natasha, what's been some of the feedback and reactions to the students on the college tour?
Well, Paul and Ann, what do you think? What do you think of some of the feedback? I know they feel more connected, they feel uplifted, but we have some surveys that Ann has done, and maybe you could help out with that, Ann.
We, as being a researcher, you always want to make sure that you know what your cohort is doing and collecting data. And so I suggested that we really, reach out and ask people who are generally receptive to surveys. So we just had there were maybe 8 questions or something. And, it was, how did you feel before? How did you feel after? Did you feel inclusive? Did you meet a new friend? Things like that. And, everything was positive. And, the only negative thing that was on anybody's survey was, how come more people didn't attend? If we had 10 people, we should have had 20 people, and that was inspiring. And, it was very affirming, certainly for those who came up with the idea and for Mark to be able to work with, a group of people that were really interested in going back out on campus and saying, hey, this isn't therapy, but it's kind of a cool thing. And it's really different. And I really enjoyed it. And do you want to come? I mean, we even had a couple of music students that showed up and were like, just really into it. I think the feedback was overwhelmingly positive.
Terrific.
And I might add, we're renaming, Jay, for 2023, 2024, community songwriting on campus. We think the messaging of community songwriting for mental health is a double-edged sword. That kind of messaging, whether it's a dean on campus or a student who might head up a campus club about mental health, well, they connect to that messaging. But what we believe is that, that messaging does not properly sort of communicate the fun factor, because it's great fun. It's like a kind of adventure to be involved in this. And so, we're still working on and refining the communication and right on down to the name. And so this year, it's being referred to as Community Songwriting on Campus.
Terrific, terrific. Well, Mark, thank you for sharing your contribution. And I just have to say before we move on, you're quite modest yourself, being as we saw in the first image, you yourself are a member of the Rhode Island Music Hall of Fame. So the project is in quite good hands for sure. Moving on, Natasha, welcome. Delighted you are able to be here. Would you please start by sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're involved with these days, please?
Yeah, so I'm Natasha Wein. I'm an artist and a writer, and I've been creating narrative-driven art exhibitions since 2017 that include both abstract painting and writing. I developed a psychoanalytically informed creative process that I teach at a local art center as well. For me, one of the most powerful parts of art isn't just that it's expression of something, it's that you can actually externalize parts of yourself, parts of your past, unconscious parts of yourself that haven't been kind of seen yet. And when you externalize that, you can actually create a dialogue with that, understand it better, and change. So art isn't just about expression. You can literally like understand your past and rewrite your future. So I help people kind of use these skills I've developed in my process to better understand themselves and rewrite their story. So I was drawn to the I Get It project because I actually saw a poster that was right across the street from a gallery that had a show of mine in it that had 108 paintings and 4 poems. And I was like, this is a perfect fit. They were like literally across the street from each other. So I took a video of part of the exhibition and did a voiceover of some of the writing and submitted it, which is what was a submission in the I Get It project.
Terrific. Well, let's look at some of those contributions now. What are we seeing here, this piece of writing? What's your intention?
Yeah, so the gallery operated cyclically. So this was the first painting and it had a poem, and then there were a bunch more other paintings and writing. So I think here you have photos of the first and the last painting, which both have a poem with them. So part of, I think, the powerful part of expression is you're telling your story, but the moment that art becomes public, it's anyone's story. And so people project onto it their own stories and find themselves in it. So when I put a show up, the moment that it opens, it ceases to be my story and it becomes everyone's story. So this painting is the first painting of the show called Birth. And there's a poem with it that I'll read that says, I was once an egg too, inside myself for insulation, round and bloody. I always thought hatching would be more like a somersault. I grow quicker than I can peck my way out or in. I ask my parents to smile for me one last time before I make a mess of all this hope.
And could you share a little bit, find it fascinating, your work, the process you go through, just briefly, maybe the writing, the art, and how they're intertwined?
Yeah, so I used to work more from like a surreal perspective. And then when I discovered abstraction, I just fell in love with it because there's so much room for projection and analysis. So how I work is when I start painting, I don't know what I'm going to start painting. And if I did, there would be no point in making it because if I knew what I was going to make, that part of me would already be understood. And so I start painting, and through the process, I study the product and the symbolism embedded in process through projection and analysis to understand what exactly I'm working with and what sort of unconscious conflicts I'm working with. And as that sort of conflict or being sort of develops in the paintings, I usually have verbal like associations to them. And so I write at the same time, and like that dialogue between abstraction and language, sure, it like creates a story. Yeah.
You know, I know they're different mediums, but it sounds a little bit like Mark's involvement with community songwriting. Don't know what your final product's gonna be, but through the process, you sort of get this aha reawakening that's very insightful and fulfilling.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, let's move on and hear a little bit about this piece, please.
Yeah, so this was the final short poem that went with a painting, and you can't quite see the painting here, but it was about a 4 by 3 foot painting, so very large. And it was actually one that I did with my feet. And I did it with my feet because I had sustained a pretty serious neck injury that made me have almost no hand function for a period of time. So I needed to find new ways to create. So that's when I started painting abstractly with my feet, since I couldn't use my hands for months on end. So the final poem of the show is Compost. Every time I'm rotten, I dig myself into the soil and start over again, from the ground where to decay is to renew. What a blessing it is to be always incomplete, permission to burrow and then flourish into my most comfortable form, unexpected.
You know, we could spend a whole program just learning how you came about to paint with your feet. Could you just say a quick word about that? That is fascinating to hear.
Sure, yeah. So like I had to find a new way to create and make impressions and leave marks. So I had taped down a bunch of large pieces of paper and plywood to the floor. And part of the very early process of painting for me is paint mixing, really to make the colors harmonize. So when you look at them, you can see there's a family of color, not that like there's, if you use paint right out of a bottle, the colors look very dissonant because they're not related to each other. And so I like mixed paint, both like I had my wrists in a wrist brace. So I would both kind of like mix it like that or mix it with my feet. And I would kind of go between, like my palette became almost like a shallow bucket on the ground. And I would go between the palette with my feet in the paper and make marks.
The colors are so exquisite. Before we move on, a few comments you might want to make of any of your artwork that we're enjoying.
Oh, here, yeah. I mean, you can see in this particular picture that the colors are very related to each other. So the whole the paintings that went around the wall, almost in their thematic function cyclically, they also like worked that way in terms of color palette. So it like became almost a loose gradient of color shifting. So this specific photo we're looking at, they all look like they belong to the same family.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your contribution. Paul and Alex, moving on, you mentioned that, and we saw some examples of collaborating with others on the project at the beginning. We're fortunate to have a few other examples that we're going to bring up. If you could share these contributions.
We were honored to be included as a case study in this book. And Catherine Leanne Harrison and Douglas Stark are doing something that in many ways we think is related and can be related to our goals. And so historically, if you look at museums, the part of our culture that we call sports in many ways has been underrepresented in the museum world, And so the goals that Catherine Leanne and Doug have, I think, are to change that and to help museums understand that sometimes sports can be a helpful analog and a relatable analog where many people, including people who might not ordinarily go to museums, might be able to relate directly to the work of a museum and its content. And so I think if Catherine, Leanne, and Doug were here, they would say sports has been underrepresented. Maybe, I don't want to put words in their mouth, someone might say sports has been ignored by museums in the past. And so when we think about mental health, these same statements, arguably can be made about mental health. If we look historically, there has not been a great presence of exhibitions about mental health. In fact, historically, the probably most prominent museums that address mental health are museums that have been set up on the grounds of former mental hospitals. And these are museums like the Glore Psychiatric Museum in Missouri that, made it their work to look at the treatment and mistreatment of mental health in historic terms. And, Ripley's Believe It or Not, for example, has filmed at the Glore Psychiatric Museum. So there has been some representation of mental health. And this work was important to highlight the abuse, the mistreatment. However, in the last 10 years, there's been a kind of flourishing, and we're starting to see development. And so not only do we believe that museums have a similar opportunity with respect to mental health in sports, we believe these two opportunities can go together. So if we look at the practices that are being used by many athletes, if, for example, you watch tennis, it's very common now for the marquee players to practice mindfulness, to have mental coaches. And a lot of what they're doing in sports is arguably cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy skills, tools, and practices. And so we believe that through sport, we can, collaborate perhaps and create exhibitions that are at the nexus of sports and mental health, that are very relatable, and that can provide insight that is then transferable to the everyday person who might be a sports fan, but would never ever go to an exhibition about mental health.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot that's in development in this realm, and hopefully we'll have more to say about that in the future.
No, it sounds like a wonderful combination, because I know, unfortunately, there's been no shortages the last few years of very high profile athletes throughout a number of sports and different mental health situations that they're dealing with. Before we move on to hear about one or two other projects, Alex, just a couple of words about your presentation here. I think Alex might have,
Okay, Alex, I know was coming to us from her car, so it's possible she's having a difficulty. I don't see her right now.
so Paul, this
So,
was,
so
the exhibition was at Logan Airport for a long time, and Alex, my guess is just commenting on it here and her involvement. A quick word, because we'd like to hear about one or two other things in the 5 minutes left.
Yes, we were invited by the Yellow Tulip Project that created an exhibition about mental health that is literally on display outside of Terminal E to this day at Logan Airport. And so we were very honored to be asked to speak about our research and speak about our work at the opening of this really wonderful exhibition. There is another wonderful exhibition about mental health at Logan Airport as well. It's in the walkway between terminals B and C, and it's called Deconstructing Stigma, and it was created by McLean Hospital. So
Nice.
if anyone who's watching is traveling in the near future, both of these are photographic exhibitions and quite powerful.
Wonderful. Paul, in about a minute or so, could you share with viewers the collaboration here that we're seeing a graphic of?
So we were approached by a teacher at this school in New York City. NYC School is an application school. They are not considered a charter school, but they are a public school. And it's a very diverse school. And the teacher was had offered a course this past year that literally is by this name, right? The name of her course is Mental Illness Treatment and Mistreatment in New York City. Part of the course involves students making videos about their experience with mental health and wellness in the current moment, and also their understanding of the history of mental health in New York City, including the work of Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly is one of the great reformers of the 1800s, a journalist who had herself committed to an asylum that was being operated there on Blackwell's Island, which is literally right off of Manhattan. And the students get to learn about the work of Nellie Bly and contemplate mental health and mental illness and its treatment in modern society, and particularly in New York City. So we've been honored in a number of cases to collaborate after someone's reached out to us, and so we're thrilled about this collaboration. We also have a collaboration coming up with a public high school in Massachusetts, where they will be running their own iteration, if you will, of I Get It. And
Paul,
that's
just
a minute.
for the sake of time, just a few words, hearing you and everybody else who's participated during the program share what's come from initial conversation, whether it was at a picnic table or another chance meeting, to what you have today. How have you and everybody connected with the project been able to get so far with what seems like limited resources?
So we think we have a kind of secret sauce with how we operate. And it has to do with, it directly impacts, I think, how we perform. The first day Alex and I ever met one another, within an hour, we were swapping mental health diagnoses. And we both had a really strong feeling we'd be working together on this project. And we agreed at that point, we call it our day one agreement, that self-care always had to come first. No doubt the project could probably be farther along than where it is right now had we not agreed to that, but we might not be in a position to carry it forward if we burned ourselves out. So the idea of putting self-care first is something that we try to stay committed to, even if we're not perfect about it. I think another difference maker for us is, if you're familiar with the concept of flow, the idea of being in flow, those that we're working with, particularly interns and others, there's so much work that could be done on this project. We try to essentially allow our interns to make a decision of what do they want to work on, what is coming from their heart, and what is it that's going to help them feel like they're in flow with this work and that they're really connected to it.
Oh, unfortunately, I've got to stop there. We've come to the end of our time. It's gone incredibly fast, so informative, very appreciative of all of you for taking the time to inform us about the National Museum of Mental Health project. In the credits, we'll have a number of ways you can stay connected, perhaps get involved. And to all of you here, continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
It's been an honor to be with each of you. Thank you, Jen.
Likewise.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us, and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.